Snow fell in slow motion over Chicago, blanketing the city in white silence. The kind of cold that didn't just sting the skin. It reached inside, touching bone and memory. Under the steel bridge near the river, where the hum of passing cars replaced lullabies, Eli Thompson pulled his thin jacket tighter around his chest. He was 13 years old and already felt a century older. He sat on a flattened cardboard box, sketching in a torn notebook by the weak light of a street lamp. The drawing was rough but full of care. A hospital room, bright and full of warmth, with a nurse smiling at a patient. Above the door, in shaky handwriting, he'd written, "Thompson Memorial Hospital, free care for everyone." He smiled faintly at it. "One day," he whispered. His stomach growled, interrupting the dream. He looked down at the small paper bag beside him, half a sandwich he'd saved from the shelter earlier that day. He hesitated, then tucked it back inside. Tomorrow, he told himself. Maybe. A gust of wind howled through the underpass. Ayla wrapped himself in an old blanket, listening to the echo of footsteps fading somewhere above. Nights were long when you had no home, but he wasn't afraid anymore. He'd seen worse. The day his mother, a nurse who worked double shifts, had collapsed from pneumonia and never woken up. Hospitals had bills, dreams had prices, and kindness didn't always survive winter. Still, he carried hers inside him. "Eli," she used to say, "the world breaks people who stop caring. Don't let it break you," he whispered to the cold. "I won't, Mom." Across town, behind tall iron gates and walls of glass, Dr. Adrian Cole was performing a different kind of ritual, his nightly devotion to work. The Cole mansion sat like a fortress over Lake Forest, glowing in the dark with sterile perfection. Every line, every room, every piece of art whispered discipline. Adrian stood in his office, tie loosened, staring at a framed article on the wall. Dr. Adrian Cole, the heart surgeon, who never fails. He'd saved hundreds of lives but couldn't save his own family. His wife had died in a car accident 3 years earlier, and since then, emotion had become an inconvenience. He spoke to his daughter, Sophie, through assistants, through schedules, through silence. That night, Sophie sat in her room, legs crossed on the floor, building a tiny house from wooden blocks. Her nanny called from the hallway. "Miss Sophie, bedtime." "Okay," she said, but didn't move. She looked out the large window where snowflakes drifted past the glass. "Do you think angels get cold?" She whispered to no one. She missed her mother. She missed laughter. Mostly she missed being seen. Downstairs, Adrian's phone buzzed. Another emergency. He picked up his coat. "Tell Sophie I'll be late again," he told the nanny. The woman nodded, her eyes sympathetic. "It's Christmas week, sir." He paused, then forced a smile. The heart doesn't wait for holidays. Midnight crept across the city like a hush. Snow thickened, the streets emptying of life. Eli had wandered from the bridge, hands buried deep in his pockets, following the glow of distant streetlights. His shoes were soaked through, toes numb, but he kept walking. He passed warm diners and shining cars, their windows fogged with laughter. No one looked at him twice. The city was full of eyes that didn't see. He stopped at a park bench to rest when a faint sound reached him, crying, high-pitched, desperate. He froze, listening. It came again, softer this time, muffled by snow. He followed the sound down a quiet street, lined with grand houses, lights dimmed for the night. At the end of the cul-de-sac, he saw her, a little girl in pink pajamas curled beside the front steps of a mansion, arms wrapped around herself, shivering violently. "Hey," Eli whispered, kneeling beside her, "you okay?" She looked up, eyes wide and glassy. "I can't get in." "The door locked. My nanny left." "Daddy's at the hospital." Eli looked around. No lights, no motion. The air bit like knives. "You're freezing," he said, unzipping his coat and wrapping it around her small shoulders. "Here." She clutched it weakly. "It's so cold." "I know," he said softly. We'll stay here till morning. Someone'll come. He looked at her tiny hands, blue from the cold, and knew waiting wasn't enough. He rubbed her arms, trying to create warmth. What's your name? Sophie. I'm Eli, her teeth chattered. Are you an angel? Eli smiled faintly. No, just someone who couldn't keep walking. She leaned against him, her small body trembling. He held her closer, whispering nonsense stories about warm chocolate rivers, about building a hospital made of light. Her breathing slowed, still cold, but calmer. The snow fell heavier, blanketing them both. He could barely feel his fingers anymore, but he kept his arms around her. Somewhere deep inside, the echo of his mother's voice whispered, "Never pass by someone hurting." He whispered back, "Not tonight." Hours later, headlights cut through the white blur as Dr. Adrian Cole's car turned into the driveway. He was exhausted, his mind still in the operating room, when he saw something that made his blood freeze. A small figure, his daughter, lying motionless on the porch. He bolted from the car. "Sophie!" He fell to his knees, shaking her gently. She stirred, eyes half open. "Daddy?" Relief hit him like oxygen. Then he saw the boy, slumped beside her, still wrapped around her, unmoving. Who is this?" He muttered, checking for a pulse. Faint, but there. The boy's skin was ice cold, his lips pale. He scooped Sophie into his arms, shouting for the house alarm, for help. The staff came running. "Call an ambulance." Now, he turned to the boy again. "Stay with me, kid," he whispered, shaking him lightly. "Stay with me." Eli's eyelids fluttered. He mumbled something barely audible. She was cold. Then everything went black. The hospital lights felt too bright when Eli opened his eyes. The world swam in white walls and beeping machines. For a second, he thought he'd died, until he saw the face of a man standing beside him. The man wore a tailored coat and eyes that looked carved from stone. "You're awake," the man said. "You saved my daughter." Eli blinked, disoriented. "The little girl." "She's okay?" The man nodded. "She's fine." "Thanks to you." Eli tried to sit up, but tubes pulled at his arm. "I didn't mean to break in. She was cold." "You didn't break in," the man said quietly. "You saved her life." Eli relaxed slightly. "Good." He looked around nervously. "Are the cops coming?" The man frowned. "Why would they? Because people don't like when kids like me show up where we don't belong." For the first time, Dr. Adrian Cole had no answer. He studied the boy, the dirt under his nails, the bruises on his knuckles, the fear disguised as defiance. "What's your name?" he asked. "Eli." "Where do you live, Eli?" Eli hesitated. "Around," Adrian sighed. "You mean nowhere?" Eli looked away. "Doesn't matter." Adrian's phone buzzed. Reporters, hospital administrators, donors, all wanting to know about the hero homeless boy. He silenced it. "Rest, Eli. You're safe here." Eli didn't believe that word anymore, but he closed his eyes. For the first time in a long while, the air around him didn't feel like a threat. Outside the room, Sophie sat in a chair beside her nanny, clutching a stuffed bear. When Adrian came out, she ran to him. "Daddy, Eli's awake." He knelt. "He is. You can thank him later." She looked up at him, eyes searching. "Are you mad at him?" "No," Adrian said softly. "I don't think I can be." "Then can he stay with us till he gets better?" Adrian hesitated. "That's not how it works." "Why?" she asked. "He saved me. Doesn't that mean he's family now?" Her words hit him harder than any scalpel ever could. He smiled weakly. "We'll see." That night, Adrian stood by the window of the hospital room where Eli slept. Snow still fell outside, the world washed clean in silence. He thought about all the lives he'd saved with his hands, and the one he'd nearly lost because of his heart. He looked at the boy and whispered, "You gave everything you had." "And I almost had nothing left to give. For the first time in years, Doctor." Adrian Cole prayed, not for success, not for control, but for guidance. Because something told him this was only the beginning. The story broke like dawn across the city. Homeless boy saves surgeon's daughter from freezing to death. The headline glowed on every screen. For once, Eli Thompson's name wasn't followed by a case number or an arrest report. It was followed by words like hero, miracle, and guardian angel. But he didn't see any of that. He was still lying in the hospital bed, 4 tubes in his arm, staring at the ceiling as morning light crept through the blinds. The room smelled like antiseptic and warm sheets, safer than any place he'd known in years, yet it felt temporary, like he might vanish at any moment. A nurse walked in, smiling gently. "Good morning, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" Eli shrugged. "Like I don't belong here." She paused, recognizing the tone of someone too used to being invisible. "You belong wherever kindness brings you," she said softly, adjusting his blanket. He wanted to believe that. Down the hallway, Doctor. Adrian Cole stood in his office with his hands braced against the window frame, watching the snow melt on the parking lot below. The hospital buzzed with whispers. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The country's most famous heart surgeon had his daughter saved by a boy who had nothing but heart. A nurse knocked. "Sir, there's a news crew asking for a statement." He turned. "Tell them no comment." "Yes, sir." As she left, he rubbed his eyes. He'd faced death 1,000 times on operating tables, but this was different. It was life staring him down, asking questions he didn't want to answer. His assistant entered next. "Dr. Cole, social services are here. They want to speak about the boy," he sighed. "Send them in." 2 women stepped in, one with a kind face and tired eyes, Martha Green, and a younger officer beside her, Detective Rosa Martinez. They introduced themselves politely, then went straight to business. "We've reviewed the case," Martha said. "Eli's been homeless for over a year. Multiple placements, all unstable. He's not in the system anymore. He slipped through." Rosa added, "He's a good kid though. No record, no drugs, no theft, just surviving." Adrian frowned. "So what happens now?" "We'll have to place him back into care," Martha said gently. "It's procedure." Adrian's chest tightened. "Care? You mean the same system that left him freezing under a bridge?" Martha hesitated. "It's all we can do for now." "No," Adrian said firmly. "Not this time. Not after what he did." Rosa studied him carefully. "Dr. Cole, are you suggesting?" "I'm saying he stays here," Adrian interrupted. "Under my supervision, until we figure something better out." Martha shook her head. "That's highly irregular. So is a homeless child saving a billionaire's daughter," Adrian snapped. "Maybe it's time irregularity did some good." Rosa's lips twitched, suppressing a smile. "We can file a temporary protective arrangement. It'll need approval from family court." "Then do it," Adrian said. "I'll sign whatever's needed." When they left, Adrian leaned against the desk, exhaling slowly. Somewhere deep inside, a wall had cracked, the kind built not of pride, but of grief. Later that afternoon, Sophie tiptoed into Eli's hospital room holding a cup of chocolate milk. Her cheeks were rosy, her curls wild. "Hi," she said shyly. Eli looked up, surprised. "Hey, star girl," she giggled. "You remembered." He shrugged with a small smile. "Hard to forget someone who snores like a truck." Her mouth dropped open. "I do not," he grinned. "Do too." She laughed so hard it echoed off the sterile walls. The nurse poked her head in, smiling at the sound. It was the first time laughter had lived in that room. When Sophie finally sat beside him, she handed over the cup. "Dad said you can stay at our house while you get better." Ella blinked. "Your house?" She nodded, proud. "It's really big. Like a castle. You can see the stars from the balcony." He hesitated. "Why would he do that?" "Because you're my hero," she said simply. And heroes need a home. By evening, the news had exploded beyond the hospital. Talk shows debated his future, strangers sent donations, and online campaigns called him Chicago's snow angel. Eli tried not to care. He'd learned long ago that people loved tragedy as long as it ended neatly. But nothing about his life had ever ended neatly. When Dr. Cole came to check on him, Eli spoke first. "You don't have to let me stay. I'm used to being on my own." Adrian sat beside the bed. "Maybe I'm the one who's not used to letting people in." Eli studied him, the expensive suit, the tired eyes, the hands that looked both powerful and fragile. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Eli smirked faintly. "More yelling, less human." Adrian chuckled softly. "I used to be like that." "Used to?" "Working on it," he admitted. The next morning, Adrian signed the papers. Temporary custody, Dr. Adrian Cole, guardian of minor Eli Thompson. The court order was valid for 30 days. Enough time to figure out a permanent arrangement, at least on paper. But fate had a different plan. When they arrived at the Cole mansion, Eli stopped at the gate, staring up at the glass facade. It looked less like a house and more like something out of a dream, or a museum where people like him weren't allowed to touch anything. "You can breathe, you know," Adrian said lightly. Eli stepped in, wide-eyed. "You could fit 5 bridges in here." Sophie ran ahead, tugging his hand. "Come see my room." He followed, awkwardly holding his backpack, his only possession, like a shield. The house smelled of lemon polish and silence. No warmth, no family pictures, just echoes. In Sophie's room, fairy lights twinkled over a wall of stars she'd painted herself. "That's Orion," she said proudly. "Mom taught me before she went to heaven." Eli's face softened. "My mom used to say stars are windows where angels watch us." Sophie gasped. "Then maybe they're watching together," he smiled. "Maybe they are." That night, Eli couldn't sleep. The bed was too soft, the air too still. He got up and wandered through the dark hallways until he found Adrian's office. The man was there, still awake, staring at a pile of unfinished medical files. "You work even when you don't have to?" Eli asked from the doorway. Adrian looked up, startled. "Old habits." Eli stepped in slowly. "Why?" "Because it's easier than thinking." Eli nodded. "That makes sense." Adrian gestured for him to sit. "And you? Can't sleep?" "Too quiet," Eli said. "When you live outside, silence feels weird. You keep waiting for sirens or trains." They sat there in silence for a while, 2 worlds that never should have met, yet somehow felt less lonely together. Finally, Adrian asked, "Do you miss her, your mother?" Eli nodded. "Every day. But I think she'd be mad if I stopped trying." Adrian looked down at his hands. "Mine too." Their eyes met, the same ache, the same guilt mirrored across generations. Something unspoken passed between them, the start of something fragile and real. Days turned into a routine. Eli helped Sophie with homework, fixed the squeaky hinges that had annoyed her nanny for years, and learned that fancy houses could still feel empty. He washed dishes without being asked. One afternoon, Adrian found him in the backyard repairing an old birdhouse. "You're handy," he said. Eli shrugged. "Mom taught me." Sighed. "Everything broken deserves a chance to work again." Adrian nodded slowly. She was right, but not everyone agreed. At the hospital, colleagues whispered behind his back, "He's turning his mansion into an orphanage." Donors hinted that the public sympathy stunt might tarnish his reputation. Even hospital directors advised him to distance himself for professionalism. Adrian ignored them all. For once, he didn't care about optics, only about doing the right thing. One evening, after dinner, Sophie insisted they watch a movie together. She curled between them on the couch, asleep halfway through. Ellie laughed quietly. "Guess heroes are boring," Adrian smiled. Not to her. When the credits rolled, he turned to the boy. "You know Eli." People are offering to fund your education. Scholarships, programs, even housing. Eli's eyes widened. Seriously? Yes, you could go to a real school. Maybe even study medicine one day. Eli hesitated. Do you think I could? I think, Adrian said softly, you already have the heart for it. Eli grinned, the kind of smile that carried both hope and disbelief. Then I'll try. That night, after tucking Sophie in, Adrian stood at her door watching her sleep. The quiet hum of her breathing was like a melody he hadn't heard in years. Fragile, human, grounding. He turned off the light and walked down the hall, passing Eli's room. The boy was asleep, one hand over his chest, clutching the edge of the blanket like a lifeline. For the first time in a decade, the house didn't feel like a mausoleum. It felt alive. The next morning, Adrian's phone rang before dawn. It was the hospital, emergency surgery. He paused by Sophie's room, hesitating, then by Eli's. Both slept soundly. Keep them safe, he whispered, as if the house could hear. He didn't know it yet, but the next 24 hours would test everything he'd begun to rebuild. By noon, a news report flashed across screens. Whitman Medical Center faces investigation over neglected patients in pediatric wing. Adrian froze in disbelief. That was his hospital, his department. His name on the door. Reporters called within minutes. Board members demanded statements. He answered none. He went straight to the hospital and faced chaos, cameras, protests, flashing lights. But the story wasn't about him. It was about a cover-up, a neglected case file that had led to a child's death 6 months prior. Someone had hidden it to protect a reputation, someone under his leadership. And for the first time in his career, Dr. Adrian Cole realized that saving lives on the table wasn't enough if the system outside was still killing quietly. That night, he returned home exhausted, defeated. He found Eli waiting by the fireplace with Sophie asleep in his lap. The boy looked up. Rough day? Adrian nodded, sinking into the chair beside him. You could say that. You'll fix it, Eli said simply. Adrian smiled weakly. How can you be so sure? Because you fixed people who were dying inside, Eli said. That's harder. Adrian looked at him, speechless. The boy had no degrees, no titles, yet in a single sentence, he dismantled a lifetime of arrogance. He leaned back, closing his eyes. You might be right, Eli grinned. I usually am. Snow had melted from the streets, but the cold lingered in the air, not from weather, but from unease. The house that had once felt full of new warmth now seemed to hold its breath. Eli could sense it before anyone said a word. Something had changed in Dr. Cole. The morning news confirmed it. Whitman Medical under fire, Dr. Adrian Cole, named in investigation of negligence case. The headline flashed across the kitchen TV. The nanny quickly turned it off, but Eli had already seen enough. Sophie, sitting at the counter with her cereal, frowned. Why are they saying bad things about Daddy? Eli glanced at her, unsure what to say. Sometimes people talk before they know the whole story. Is Daddy in trouble? He hesitated. Maybe, but that doesn't mean he's wrong. She looked down, tracing a finger along her bowl. They always blame the ones who help the most. Eli smiled faintly. You sound like him already. When Adrian came downstairs later, his tie was crooked, his eyes tired. He poured coffee with the detachment of a man who'd been awake too long. Eli stood near the counter, awkwardly. You okay? Adrian didn't answer immediately. Then, they think I covered up a death in the pediatric unit. A child died while I was chief of staff. Eli frowned. But you didn't, right? No, Adrian said. But I should have seen it. The file was buried. Signed off under my authority. He took a deep breath. It's my hospital, Eli. My name on the building. Responsibility doesn't stop at intention. The boy nodded slowly. You always tell people their heart can't heal unless they face the problem. Adrian looked up, surprised by the maturity in that voice. "Guess I taught you too well." Eli smiled faintly. "Guess you taught yourself too." Over the following week, reporters camped outside the mansion. Cameras flashed through the gate whenever Adrian's car pulled out. Eli hated it. The attention felt invasive, wrong. But Sophie found it exciting at first. "They're like movie people," she said, waving from her bedroom window until Adrian gently pulled her away. "Sweetheart, they're not making a movie," he said softly. "They're looking for mistakes." Her face fell. "But you didn't do anything bad." He knelt beside her. "Sometimes the truth takes time to catch up." Sophie's eyes shimmered. "Like with Eli?" Adrian smiled sadly. "Exactly like with Eli." That night, the doorbell rang. It was Detective Rosa Martinez, her coat dusted with snow. "Sorry to drop by late," she said, stepping inside. "It's about Eli." Adrian stiffened. "What about him?" Rosa hesitated. "Social services reopened his case. They're questioning whether his placement with you is appropriate given your current investigation." Eli, who had been listening from the hallway, stepped forward. "They can't do that. I didn't do anything wrong." "I know, kid," Rosa said gently. "But bureaucracy doesn't care about good intentions." Adrian's tone hardened. "They'll have to go through me." Rosa looked at him with something between admiration and warning. "Be careful, doctor. The system doesn't like people who make it look bad." When she left, silence filled the room again, heavy, suffocating. Sophie tugged on Adrian's sleeve. "They're not taking him, right?" He looked down at her, his voice steady but low. "Not if I can help it." Days turned into hearings, papers, calls. The hospital scandal widened. Old cases resurfaced. Critics sharpened their knives. Adrian faced the board with his usual calm, but inside he was unraveling. Every question, every accusation pulled at the old guilt he'd buried under years of work. The more he fought to clear his name, the more he realized this wasn't about protecting reputation. It was about reclaiming integrity. Meanwhile, at home, Eli packed a small bag quietly one evening. Sophie found him by the front door. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Just in case," he said. "If they make me leave, I don't want it to be hard." She shook her head, tears forming. "You can't go. Daddy needs you." "I need you." He knelt in front of her. "You'll be okay, star girl." "You always are." She threw her arms around him, sobbing. "You promised we'd look at the stars together." He hugged her back tightly. "Then I guess I'm not leaving yet." That same night, Adrian came home later than usual. He found them asleep on the couch, Sophie curled up on Eli's chest, both surrounded by a blanket. He stood there for a long time, something inside him breaking open. He whispered to himself, "This is what family looks like." He didn't realize Rosa Martinez was standing quietly behind him. "I've seen a lot of cases," she said softly. "But not many like this." Adrian turned. "Then help me keep it that way." Rosa nodded slowly. "I'll see what I can do." The next morning, social worker Martha Green returned for a formal evaluation. She carried a clipboard, her expression neutral but not unkind. "Eli," she said, sitting across from him in the living room, "do you feel safe here?" He nodded immediately. "Safer than anywhere." "Do you trust Dr. Cole?" "Yes, ma'am." She looked at Adrian. "And you're willing to take full guardianship if the state approves?" "I'm not willing," he said quietly. "I'm determined." She raised an eyebrow. "That's a first." He smiled faintly. "Then mark it down." Sophie, sitting nearby, whispered, "Can I say something?" Martha hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead." Sophie looked at them both with solemn eyes. "Eli saved my life, but he also saved my dad's heart. So maybe God sent him here. And you can't send someone God sent away." Martha's pen stopped mid-note. She smiled softly. "Well," she said, "I don't think I can argue with that." Over the next weeks, Adrian's world turned upside down. Yet somehow, for the first time, it felt right. He suspended himself from surgery voluntarily, stating in a public interview, "Medicine can't heal what accountability refuses to touch." The statement shocked the city. Some called him foolish, others called him brave. For Eli and Sophie, it was simple. They called him Dad more often without realizing it. Eli started attending school under a scholarship funded anonymously, though he suspected Adrian's quiet hand behind it. At first, the other kids whispered, "That's the homeless kid from TV." But soon they stopped when he outperformed them in science class and fixed a broken projector during a presentation. When a teacher asked what he wanted to be when he grew up, he said without hesitation, "A doctor." The kind that listens. At home, Adrian tried to cook dinner one night, a disaster that ended in burned pasta and laughter so loud it startled the housekeeper. Eli doubled over, laughing. "You save hearts for a living but can't boil noodles?" Adrian chuckled, wiping sauce off his sleeve. "Everyone has blind spots," Sophie added between giggles. "Maybe you should let Eli do the surgeries too." Adrian smiled at them both. Not yet. But one day, it was a small, ordinary night. Yet for all three of them, it felt extraordinary. The kind of moment that stitched broken lives together without anyone noticing. But peace never arrives without a test. 2 days later, Adrian received a letter from the court. Hearing scheduled, review of temporary guardianship case, Eli Thompson. He read it twice, then sat down heavily. Sophie was at school. Eli was doing homework in the living room. For the first time in months, fear crept back into the walls. That evening, he told Eli, "They're reviewing your placement." It could go either way. Eli took it quietly. "It's okay." "I knew it wouldn't last forever." Adrian frowned. "Why do you say that?" "Because good things never do." Adrian knelt in front of him. "Listen to me. Some good things aren't meant to pass. They're meant to stay. You hear me?" Eli nodded, eyes wet. "Yeah." Adrian gripped his shoulder. "Then we'll make them see that." The courtroom felt colder than any winter night. Rows of seats, polished wood, indifferent faces. Eli sat beside Adrian, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit, his hands trembling in his lap. Across from them, Martha presented the file, every fact about his life laid bare. Homelessness, orphaned, the system's failures. When she finished, the judge, a gray-haired man with a kind but weary face, looked at Eli. "Son," he said, "you've had a hard life. Why do you want to stay with Dr. Cole?" Eli took a breath. "Because with him and Sophie, I don't feel like a problem to solve. I feel like a person." The judge nodded slowly. "And you, Dr. Cole, why fight for a child who isn't yours?" Adrian met his gaze. "Because he saved my daughter's life. But more than that, he reminded me what mine was worth." Silence filled the courtroom. Then Sophie, sitting quietly in the back, stood up. "Your Honor?" The judge blinked. "Yes, young lady?" She held up a drawing, 3 stick figures holding hands under a big heart. "He's already ours," she said softly. "We just need the papers to catch up." A murmur rippled through the room. The judge smiled faintly. "Sometimes justice is simpler than law." He signed the order. Eli stared, uncomprehending, until Adrian squeezed his shoulder. "You're home," Adrian whispered. The boy broke down, sobbing, years of cold, hunger, and loneliness melting at once. That night, the Cole mansion was alive with celebration. Neighbors brought food, hospital colleagues sent flowers. Reporters called, but Adrian turned them all away. He just wanted quiet. After everyone left, he found Eli standing outside on the balcony, looking up at the stars. "Cold?" Adrian asked, handing him a blanket. Eli smiled. "Not anymore." They stood there in silence for a while. "You know," Adrian said, "I used to think saving lives meant keeping hearts beating. Turns out, it's about what you do after." Eli looked up at him. "Guess we're both doctors now," Adrian chuckled softly. "Guess we are." Sophie ran out, barefoot, holding 2 mugs of cocoa. Make room. The stars are watching." They laughed, pulling her between them, wrapping her in the blanket. Above them, the winter sky shimmered clear, 1,000 silent witnesses to three hearts that had found each other by accident and refused to let go. Years passed, and the winters in Chicago never softened. But for Eli Thompson, the cold no longer felt cruel. He used to measure life by nights survived. Now he measured it by mornings earned. It was snowing again the day he walked out of Northwestern University Medical School, diploma in hand. A dozen flashes from cameras followed him, but he barely noticed. What mattered wasn't the piece of paper, it was the faces waiting in the crowd. Sophie, now 17, taller, confident, eyes bright with pride. And beside her, Dr. Adrian Cole, a little grayer, a little slower, but smiling like a man who had finally made peace with the world. When Eli saw them, he laughed. That same unguarded laugh that had once filled a hospital room with hope. Sophie threw her arms around him. "Dr. Thompson," she teased. "Sounds weird, doesn't it?" He grinned. "Better than snow angel." Single quotes. Adrian clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You did it, son." The word son still made Eli's throat tighten. No legal paper or bloodline could define what they had built. Some families were formed by love, others by survival. Theirs was both. That night, they celebrated quietly at home. The mansion had changed over the years, photos lined the walls now, laughter lived in every corner. Gone were the sterile surfaces and echoing rooms. There were coffee rings on tables, scribbles on the kitchen calendar, and flowers Sophie kept forgetting to water. Over dinner, Adrian raised a glass. "To the boy who taught me that heart surgery isn't the hardest kind of healing," Sophie added. "And to my brother, who still can't cook to save his life." Eli laughed. "Hey, I save lives. You burn pancakes." "Only sometimes," she said, sticking out her tongue. They toasted, three people bound not by tragedy anymore, but by gratitude. For a long time, none of them spoke. It wasn't silence. It was fullness, the kind that didn't need words. The next morning, Eli stood in front of Whitman Medical Center, the same hospital where his story had begun a decade earlier. His ID badge read, "Dr. Eli Thompson, pediatric cardiology resident." He paused by the entrance, remembering. The cold steps where he'd once held a freezing child. The hospital room where he'd first opened his eyes to a stranger's kindness. The man who'd once seen him as a burden but had become his father. He whispered to the wind, "Full circle, huh, Mom?" The automatic doors slid open and he stepped inside. Meanwhile, Adrian Cole had retired from surgery, but not from purpose. He now directed the Whitman Foundation for Medical Equality, spending his days advocating for free clinics and training programs for underprivileged youth. Eli's dream made real. He often said to journalists, "I used to measure success in lives saved. Now I measure it in lives empowered." At his office, he kept one photograph framed above his desk, the three of them, standing in the snow outside the old bridge, taken years after the night that changed everything. The caption Sophie had written beneath it read, "The night the world remembered its heart, he never changed it." One afternoon, Adrian visited the hospital to see Eli at work. He watched from the observation room as his son leaned over a small patient, explaining the procedure with calm, reassuring confidence. "This'll help your heart beat stronger," Eli told the little boy. "And afterward, you'll be able to run faster than all your friends." The child smiled weakly. "Promise?" Eli grinned. "Doctors promise." When he finished, Adrian met him in the hallway. "You sounded just like your mother today," he said quietly. Eli smiled. "You mean my real one or the one I got stuck with?" Adrian laughed. "Both." They walked together down the corridor, side by side. The student who had become the teacher, and the surgeon who had learned to feel again. Time, as it does, kept moving. Sophie left for college, journalism, naturally. She said she wanted to tell stories that made people believe in people. Again, She wrote her first feature on Eli's foundation work, titled "The Boy Who Gave His Heart and Got the World Back." It went viral. Not because of tragedy this time, but because of truth. In the article's closing lines, she wrote, "He once thought he had nothing to give. But what he gave us was proof that love, when shared, multiplies. It's the only kind of wealth that never runs out." Eli read it alone in his office and cried quietly, not out of sadness, but out of awe for the life he'd never expected to have. 3 years later, Adrian's health began to falter. Nothing serious at first, fatigue, dizziness. But eventually, the test showed what he already suspected. His own heart was failing. The years had caught up to him. He refused special treatment, preferring to stay at home surrounded by family and memories. Ayla visited daily after work. Sophie came home from college to help care for him. On quiet afternoons, the three of them would sit by the window watching the lake freeze over, just like that first winter. "You know," Adrian said one day, "I used to think my life's greatest moment was performing a record-breaking heart transplant." Eli smiled. "Let me guess, I ruined that ranking?" Adrian chuckled weakly, completely. Turns out, saving someone's life is easy compared to learning how to live one. Sophie took his hand gently. "You did both," he smiled. "Because of you too." The night before he passed, Adrian asked for one thing. "Take me to the bridge," he whispered. It was snowing again, soft flakes falling under the streetlight. Eli carried him there, wrapped in blankets, while Sophie followed close behind. The city was silent, as if holding its breath. They stopped at the exact spot where Eli had once slept, the same corner where his story began. Adrian looked around and smiled faintly. "I can still feel it. The cold, the fear, the miracle." Eli knelt beside him, tears glistening. "You were the miracle." "No," Adrian said softly. "You were. I was just lucky enough to be changed by it." He reached up, resting a trembling hand over Eli's heart. "You kept this beating, in more ways than one." Sophie's voice cracked. "Dad," he smiled at her, the same gentle smile that had once been so rare. "You were always my light." Then, with the snow falling gently around them, he closed his eyes. The heartbeat monitor app on Eli's phone, something he'd insisted on using to track vitals, gave one last steady tone. And then silence. The funeral drew thousands, hospital staff, patients, families. But for Eli and Sophie, it wasn't a ceremony, it was a promise. They buried him beside his wife, under an oak tree that faced the sunrise. On the gravestone, they engraved the words Adrian had once spoken in court. "He reminded me what my life was worth." After everyone left, Eli and Sophie stayed behind, their breath misting in the cold air. Eli whispered, "He used to think he was fixing hearts. But really, he built one that'll outlive him." Sophie nodded through tears. "Then let's make sure it keeps beating." Months later, Ayla launched a new program under the Whitman Foundation, the Adrian Cole Fellowship, providing full scholarships to homeless and foster youth pursuing medical fields. At the opening ceremony, cameras flashed, reporters crowded. But when Eli stepped up to the microphone, he spoke not as a headline, but as a son. "My father believed hearts could be repaired. I believe they can be reborn. 10 years ago, I was a boy with nothing. A stranger gave me warmth, then a family, then a future. He taught me that we don't need to share blood to share purpose. So if you ever wonder whether kindness still matters, I'm standing here because it does." The audience rose in silent applause, not loud, not chaotic, just long and full. Sophie stood at the side of the stage, tears streaming down her cheeks. She mouthed, "He'd be proud." Eli looked up, smiling. "I know." Later that evening, he walked out of the hall into the cold Chicago night. The air was sharp, the city lights reflecting off the snow. He tilted his head upward. The stars were faint, but they were there, scattered like promises across the dark. He remembered that night again, the child in pink pajamas, the sound of her sobs, the feeling of her heartbeat slowly returning under his trembling arms. One choice, one act, one moment that had rewritten every moment after. He whispered to the sky, "You were right, Mom. Never stop caring." From somewhere deep inside, it felt like the world whispered back. A decade later, Sophie wrote the final chapter of their story, a book titled He Had Nothing to Give, Except His Heart. It opened with a single line, "Sometimes, the people with the least to offer give us the most to live for." The dedication read simply, "For Eli and for every soul who chose love over survival." Eli never stopped working. He became one of the most respected pediatric heart surgeons in the country, known not for fame but for compassion. He treated every patient like the child he once saved in the snow. Every year, on the anniversary of that night, he and Sophie would visit the bridge. They'd leave a single red scarf tied to the railing, the same color as the coat he'd once wrapped around her. And then, together, they'd look up at the stars, not to remember pain, but to honor light, the kind that never goes out. Reflections. He had no home, no money, no power, just a heart that refused to look away. And that was enough to save a life, to build a family, to change the world. Because love, once given freely, never truly ends. It only passes on, one heartbeat to another.